Welcome to Sunday with Cows. I'm on a hill outside of Nashville, Tennessee, without anybody. No one would show up today. It is brutally hot again today, just humidity. You sweat just looking at the world today. So it's good to have you. What I want to talk to you about today, something I'm kind of excited about because I've been working hard on this message. And what I want to talk to you about today, as we continue in the life of Elijah. Last week we kind of took a detour, but back on Elijah this week, I want to talk to you about how you can not survive life, but invent life. A lot of us are just surviving. We're doing our job, we're paying our bills, but we just don't seem to have any purpose in our life. So how can you invent life instead of survive life? And so that's what I want to talk about today. Don't forget, you can go to robertstoffel.com, pick up a copy of the Gospel According to Cows, 60-day devotional all about cows in the Bible. And Elijah's coming, a new book. It should be out next week. So I've got some good news to share with you next week. Also, you can give to Whitey's tip jar, even though she's not here. She comes to my house and stands sometimes for an hour, just waiting for other cows to kind of disperse so she can get the treats all to herself. Because she's kind of cow, if I go over and give her treats and there are a bunch of other ones, she will let them have it. She won't fight for it. So I'm still giving her treats that you send, so thank you so much for that. All right, let's get into how can you invent life instead of just survive life. Here we go. Dick Fosbury was the first high jump competitor to use the flop. Starting in the 1960s, he went over head first with his back to the bar, and some people laughed while others told him that he'd never be able to perfect the move. You know, back then the straddle method was the standard technique used in the high jump at that time, in which participants vaulted over the bar while facing it with one arm and one leg leading, but Fosbury dared to modify the standard. And this is what he said. He said, "I was told over and over again that I would never be successful, that I was not going to be competitive, and the technique was simply not going to work. And all I could do was shrug and say, well, we'll just have to see." Fosbury proved his skeptics wrong when he won the gold medal at the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. And today, you won't see anybody using anything other than the Fosbury flop. Now, how did he do that? How did he break the mindset of how a high jump could be executed? No one had ever thought about this before, but Fosbury was the pioneer who asked new questions. What if I jumped backward? How could I invent a new standard? And you see, that's the problem in life so many times, is that we get stuck and we never look at life and go, how can I invent a new standard? And so we just survive life instead of inventing a new standard. And this is a different focus from living from a fixed mindset. In a fixed mindset, we ask desperate questions like, will I make the jump? Will I qualify for the event? Why do some invent life and others merely survive life? That's what I want to talk about today. How to break free from a mindset that isn't working for you, and you know it isn't working for you. Why do some of us never attempt to change the way we think? How do faulty beliefs hold us back from our destiny? There's something you should know about your brain. Your brain, this is interesting, your brain tags things that it believes is false. It's called the false tagging theory, which states each time you believe something new, your brain runs a full brain scan to create a mental representation called a PCR, which is basically a perceptual, God needs a muffler, which is nothing but a mental representation of that event or that idea in your mind. So they call it a PCR, perceptual cognitive representation in the brain. So your brain creates this. And so next time it doesn't have to do a full scan. It can quickly go, okay, tried that before, didn't work, move on. And it does this so that, this is what Eric asked. He's the founder of the false tagging theory. And this is what he says. In a very real sense, you initially believe all propositions and perceptions. So anything that comes into our brain, we believe it automatically. Just the way it works. Spinoza came up with this as well way back in the day. And so we accept what we see, we accept what we hear as being true, which is very weird, says Eric Asp. He says, then you can come back a split second later and reject it or doubt it. So that's what we do. We accept everything is true, and then we go back and we say, it's almost like, have you seen this click here to win $1 million? And for a sliver of a second, most people believe it to be true, just maybe a sliver of a second. Or that you could be the lucky one to hit the lottery. How many of you went out and bought a lottery ticket because it was 1.5 billion or whatever it was, and the odds about winning that was ridiculous. But for a sliver of a second, you thought, maybe it could be me. And so we accept whatever it is that we see, whatever it is that we have an idea about. And this is what he says the theory asserts. This is Eric Asp again. He says, belief is the mind's initial default mode of mentally representing a thought or idea. Assessment comes later, a process to determine the truth or falsity of an idea through skepticism, doubt, and reassignment. And once those determinations have been made, the brain, to function practically and efficiently, requires a shorthand tag of false value, which functions as the brain's skeptic, so as not to reassess every thought or impression from zero each time it arises. So it basically stops a full brain scan, so your brain can do a quick scan and tell you, yes, I know this to be false, don't waste your time. And the false belief gets a special tag that is handled in the prefrontal cortex. So our mindsets are more fixed and inflexible than we know, especially the older we get. Yes, neuroplasticity means that our brain can change. But it's hard to change our mind once we've learned a certain way to do something. Just ask all the skeptics of the Fosbury flop and they'll let you know that they looked at him and thought, there's no way. So how can you experience a breakthrough and break a mindset that is not working? Toxic thinking occurs when we get too many false tags in the brain. Everything takes a dark turn and we keep thinking negative thoughts that tell us we will never change. This is the way life is going to be. Just survive. Just pay your bills. Just go to work. Just keep your mind shut down. Don't invent life. Just survive life. And all of this happens because we construct a story. We decide upon an interpretation and lock into a fixed mindset, resisting the signals that tell us our story is inaccurate. And this is how we form a fixed mindset. And once it is formed, the brain puts up roadblocks, those little false tagging theories it talks about, to protect the mindset because it doesn't want to do deep thinking to resolve everything that demands our attention. That's just the way the brain is. It's an energy efficient thing in our skull. And we would go crazy if we had to reestablish the validity of everything we encounter. So this is why the false tagging theory works. And this is why once we get a bunch of false tags on a certain idea or a certain thing, then it's hard for us to say, okay, this can be done differently. What you will learn is that the brain has little skeptics that create strongholds they're difficult to demolish. And these brain skeptics are quick to turn us away from spending the energy to dispute their validity. Let me say that again. These brain skeptics are quick to turn us away from spending the energy to dispute their validity, so we never change our mindset. So let's break you free from a fixed mindset that says your circumstances won't change. And I'm going to use something that happened in the life of Elijah, and we'll see in a few weeks how even Elijah succumbed to negative thoughts. More on that later, but remember, he goes up under a broom tree and he says basically, I want to die. So he succumbs to negative thoughts. But let's wait on that into the future, because next he's commanded by God. Now, if you haven't been with us, you don't have to go back, but they have been popular posts about Elijah, and you might want to go back and watch them. But what happens with Elijah is that he went to Ahab and said, there's going to be a drought unless you change all the Baal worship that's going on in the country. And so it doesn't happen. And so Elijah gets sent to a brook where he's fed by ravens for a year, and then he gets sent to a widow's house where he stays for 2 years. And so now he's there with the widow's son and the widow, and God is commanding him to leave that place, Zarephath. So here's 1 Kings 18, 1 through 15. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." So he's, for 3 years he's been saying, "Go hide," and now he's telling Elijah, "Go show." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now, the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. And it's interesting, these quotation marks that are, these parentheses that are here. You wonder if a scribe added this later. We don't know. But Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Verse 5. Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So Ahab cared nothing about his people, all about his horses. He just wanted to make sure his horses didn't die. Forget the people, but to make sure our horses live. So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." "What have I done wrong?" asked Obadiah, "that you're handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah's here'? I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth." This is interesting how he enters all this. "Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water." Okay. You want to say, all right. "And now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah's here, he will kill me.' And Elijah said, 'As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today.'" So the thing to notice here is what Obadiah thought about Elijah and something called miraculous transference, which basically means that Elijah used I guess you could call it a beam me up Scotty way to travel from place to place, is what Obadiah thought about Elijah. And so he says, "I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you." So this is miraculous transference. So the Spirit of the Lord can pick you up and then drop you somewhere else, kind of like a beam me up Scotty type thing. And it seems that this was a popular belief about why Ahab and Jezebel couldn't locate Elijah for those 3 years of the drought. And this belief had solidified itself in the fabric of the nation. If you wanted to get killed, just tell Ahab where you spotted Elijah, and he would dutifully take your head off. And so maybe Ahab kept sending troops out to check each time someone thought they had spotted Elijah. And maybe these people got their heads removed for a false witness, so no one dared tell Ahab that Elijah was here or there, because it meant instant death. He would just say, "All right, you lied to me, take your head off." And so it's hard to see the data another way once you've seen it from another perspective. Once you've gotten that belief in your brain that, hey Elijah, miraculous transference may take you out of here, the Spirit may move you somewhere else, and hey, the false tag in my brain tells me to doubt this, not to go with this, because I just don't know what's going to happen to you. So it had become a truth to Obadiah, even though it was a lie. And so this false belief, because we've been following Elijah from place to place, haven't we? We know it's a false belief because he remained at the brook for a year. He walked for 100 miles to get to Zarephath, and we know that. He remained there for 2 years at the widow's house. We know that. Now he's commanded to go show himself to Ahab, but no one else knew where Elijah had been hiding, for God evidently hid him well. Don't you like that? So we had all this stuff going on. Everybody's looking for Elijah, and they wanted to kill him. So we see what we want to see and expect to see. Obadiah saw what he wanted to see and expected to see because he had that belief in his head that had a false tag on it that said, doubt this, you will get killed. So we construct a story, we decide upon an interpretation, and then we lock into that, resisting the signals that tell us that our story isn't accurate. So we're sense-making creatures. We really are. We want to make sense of everything that goes on around us, and we settle our mindsets even when they're wrong, because the brain hates confusion, and it hates being overloaded. And it hates to go every time we run across something, run a full brain scan. So, what was the story Obadiah had constructed about Elijah? It was that Elijah moved from place to place by miraculous transference, and he couldn't get past that. That was his mindset about Elijah. But notice that God uses a sense of surprise, and that's where I want to go with this, because if you're not allowing yourself to be surprised, then you're not able to break a mindset. The way you break a mindset is being surprised. And so let's take a look at why God startles us and why he shocks us, and however you want to state it, to see exactly what God does when he surprises us and what goes on in the brain, because it's amazing. All right, 1 Kings 18:7-8. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him, and Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" So Obadiah is walking along, and boom, Elijah steps around the corner and surprises Obadiah. He was out looking for grass for Ahab's horses. He never thought in a million years he'd run across Elijah, and it takes him by surprise. Now, it may surprise you to know that there has been plenty of research on what happens to the brain when we are surprised. It seems these days the brain is the hot topic in research, isn't it? We love to learn about the brain, what's going on in the brain. So it's going to be a hot topic in religion for years to come. And in their book, Surprise, it says there's a sequence to surprise and what it does inside the brain. Surprise freezes us. Surprise makes us seek answers about what surprises us. Surprise creates a paradigm shift. So write this down. Freeze, seek, paradigm shift. So first, surprise freezes us. Surprise elicits a spike in the brain wave called P300. You ever heard of P300? Well, whether or not you have, that's what happens when you are surprised by something. It causes a spike in P300, which hijacks our cognitive resources and pulls our attention onto the object of surprise. We see this all the time. If you've ever watched America's Funniest Home Videos, then you see people get shocked and they have that O effect crosses their face, and they freeze for a moment. Why is this? It's because P300 has spiked in the brain, causing them to freeze. Now, neuropsychologist Wolfram Schultz says surprise intensifies emotions by at least 400%. Isn't that crazy? It intensifies our emotions by at least 400%. So when you're surprised, all of your emotions go up 400%. And surprise is like a spotlight directing your attention to the way it does in the theater. When the spotlight hits, you can see only what's in the spotlight and everything else is kind of dark around. So when surprise hits us, it kind of helps us spotlight what's taking place. You think you see a snake or whatever, and your eyes are going to spotlight on what your old brain is going to check it out. Because then what we see is all there is. What we see is all there is. And all of our mental faculties have been hijacked. So Obadiah is surprised by Elijah, and he falls to the ground. And he says, "Is it really you?" So he's trying to make sense of the situation. Jesus loved the sense of surprise. The announcement of his birth surprises the shepherds in the field. They were spotlighted, weren't they? One moment everything is tranquil and normal, then boom, angels appear in bright light and they're singing. And so P300 hijacked their brains. And you talk about scaring the crap out of somebody. And those boys had more than sheep muck on their sandals after that experience. What about walking on water? There's a storm on the lake, and here comes Jesus walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. Surprise. P300 spiked in their brain, and it's an involuntary reaction. It's automatic. You can't control it. So when you spotlight a surprise, the frontal lobe quietens down the rest of your brain so that nothing else is being processed but that single-minded focus of what's taking place when you're surprised. So this moves us on to the next stage, which is the seeking stage. In this stage, we seek to explain this surprise, which leads to two different roads. We explain it away, or we defend our position. Is usually kind of what we do. Or I guess there's a third one too, because the third one is we move on to the third stage of surprise, which is paradigm shift, which we'll get to. But usually we try to explain it away, or we defend our position, and we never change our mind, really. Oh, you hear a car backfire, and you go, you're surprised by it, and it's a gunshot, and then it was just a car. So you have a thing about you is that the brain skeptic is quick to say, oh, that's what it is. This is what it is. Move on with your life. And we explain it away, or we defend our position. So we have to break down these strongholds in our brain, these little false tags that are there. And Obadiah doubled down on his explanation of the events. He believed Elijah appeared in front of him because of the miraculous transference, and that Elijah was in control of this miracle. He said, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab he doesn't find you, he'll kill me. So Obadiah could only see what he expected to see and what he wanted to see. Then he does a strange thing, and he tells Elijah about his heroic hiding of all the prophets in the cave beneath Mount Carmel. And so basically he was saying, look, I'm not getting killed over this, but I'm not all that bad, because I hit 100 prophets. I've been feeding them for the past 3 years. Now that will get your head chopped off, wouldn't it? You think Jezebel wouldn't have chopped his head off if she'd have found out who was doing this? So he's willing to do that, but he's not willing to go out on a limb for Elijah, because you see, it's hard to break those false tags in your brain, isn't it? That doubt, that fear. And so maybe after a P300 spike, our brains get a little mushy, I'm not sure, but it doesn't make much sense what he's saying here. And this is what Luna and Reniger write. They say, after surprise stops us in our tracks and wins our attention, our brains suck in and analyze information at an incredible speed. The search for answers happens so quickly that we're usually not even aware of it. So we either seek answers or provide our own explanation or interpretation. And so Obadiah made it all about himself, didn't he? He looked to the past to interpret the future, and that's what we do. So it's what the husband faced when, this old story, that a husband was trying to communicate with his wife, and so he was taking a trip around the world, and she was, and so when she got to London, she called home and asked her husband, how's the dog? And he said, oh, the dog's dead. And she said, the dog's dead? Yeah, the dog's dead. And she said, you heartless brute, you know how much I care about that dog, and you suddenly tell me the dog is dead? And the man says, well, what should I have said? She said, well, you could have told me that the dog was up on the roof. Then when I got over to Paris and called, you could have told me that the dog fell off the roof. Then when I got to Rome, you could have told me that the dog wasn't feeling very well. And then when I got to Venice, you could have told me that the dog had died. And she says, well, how's mother? And he said, she's up on the roof. When things happen just as we expect, we know how to respond. That's why we're in survival mode, is because we don't want to be surprised by life. We feel comfortable and confident, and when things go off script, especially when bad surprises attack, we feel unprepared. And this feeling triggers frustration, fear, and even sometimes shame. And I think that's what I was saying a couple of weeks ago about the story wants to tell, shame wants to tell the story of our tragedy. So you can understand the woman's response to her husband about the dog, because she did not want to be surprised, and so she wanted to remove all sense of surprise. And it happens in our life. And once we get into that mode, then we're in survival mode. We are no longer inventing life the way Fosbury did the Fosbury flop, because all of the skeptics out there and the little skeptics that are in our brain tell us that it can't be done, or that we're stupid for even trying. So Obadiah was willing to hide the prophets on his terms, but he wasn't ready to risk his neck on Elijah's terms, because he was controlling one and he was kind of out of control of the other, because he didn't know where the Spirit would take Elijah. So you see how he's kind of safeguarding his life against surprise. And he wasn't willing to change his perception of his reality. And it was his reality. And he was willing to defend it. He basically said, this is what I'm willing to do, but I'm not willing to do what you want. And he was trying to control his reality instead of surrendering to something greater. He allowed his sense of fear to predict his future. And this happens so many times in our lives. And Joe Dispenza writes this: the more we use our senses to define our reality, the more we allow our senses to determine our reality. And Obadiah would have remained stuck here if Elijah hadn't commanded again and promised Obadiah that he wasn't going anywhere. The only way to get to the next stage of the surprise sequence is to surrender something greater and experience what is called a paradigm shift. And basically that just means you change your perception of what you see. You change the false tag inside of our mind, that little brain skeptic. We remove it and we see something in a different light. So we see this in the life of Peter when he moves beyond being terrified at seeing Jesus walking on the water. He submits to what was greater than fear. He surrenders himself to the present moment. And his perception of reality shifted. He believed he could join his Lord out on the water. So to change your life and break a fixed mindset that says nothing will ever change in my life, you must experience a paradigm shift, which means you must stop limiting your future and break your mindset. A paradigm shift changes the way we see the world when we surrender to God and allow Him to create the future. We interact with God in a different way. We don't interact with the world in a sense of fear, but in a sense of faith, which changes the way we interact with everything. And Peter said, if it's you, Lord, bid me to come to you on the water. So Peter changed the way he saw the Lord, and this allowed him to overcome fear and step out of the water, because no longer was he a ghost out on the water, it was his Lord out on the water. And so he changed his perception. He had a paradigm shift. And so he no longer saw what the other 11 who remained in the boat saw. Peter saw his Lord, and in seeing his Lord in a miraculous moment, it shifted the way he interacted with the Lord, which shifted the way he interacted with the world, and suddenly everything became possible. His mind, soul, and body were working together. And Joe Dispenza writes, when one holds a dream independent of the environment, that's greatness. Go back to Fosbury Flop. When one holds a way you can do the high jump, independent of the environment that he was in at that time, that's greatness. So you have to invent your life and not survive your life. We're too quick to look at our circumstances, then we interpret our future by what we see in the environment. And Jesus said, be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. And so I must overcome the world in my thinking and think like the mind of Christ. So why does God use an element of surprise? He knows an element of surprise brings the mind fully online. It spotlights the mind. You're full. The prefrontal cortex shuts the brain down. Everything's focused. You're paying attention. P300 is spiking. It brings the mind fully online. And we've opened our eyes to a new way of being and seeing. Old narratives that have been tagged as hurtful and damaged are no longer able to influence our decisions. Or as in Peter's case, an old fishing narrative, he had to have this in his mind, that says people die in storms on the lake, so stay in the boat. That's what all the other 11 were hearing. So if we're putting all of our energy into a stress response of fear, then we never allow faith to activate internally. And God wants us to feel what faith response does to a stress response. That's why He surprises us sometimes. He wants us to feel what faith response does to a stress response. But if we're hedging our life where we don't ever experience surprise, we don't ever become vulnerable, as Peter did when he stepped out of the boat, then we never change stress response into a faith response. So Peter was quick to do this. So the faster we can accomplish this paradigm shift, the quicker we respond according to our relationship with the one who has overcome the world. Every moment we live in fear, we're living according to our circumstances. When one holds a dream independent of the environment, that's greatness. Peter walking on water, Fosbury doing the Fosbury Flop. See, faith disrupts fear. And nothing new happens until we learn to turn stress into faith. And the way we do that is by breaking free from past experiences that have been tagged as false in our brain, those little brain skeptics that say it can't be done. These false tags work like brain skeptics. And this is what's so amazing about Peter walking on the water. He immediately turned stress into faith. So, what fires the stress response is the existence of a false tag. Something has happened in the past that has become an emotional signature. An emotional signature. Don't overlook that. Our thoughts and feelings have merged. Now, our thoughts and feelings have come together. Now this thought and this emotion of that past experience throws up a roadblock each time we try to move against it. It forms a stronghold, which in Greek means a false argument in which a person seeks shelter. So it's a safe place. We like to just go, okay, let me fall back into my false argument. Let me defend my position. Let me just survive here, not invent life. And 2 Corinthians 10:4-5 says this, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. A false tag in the brain is nothing more than a false argument that we hide in for shelter because we do not want to risk surrendering to God in the moment. And these false tags create that fixed mindset, and we're not open to growth. So here's the key point. The more we allow our false arguments to define our reality, then the more the past dictates the future. So how do we remove a stronghold? We got to run a full psychological scan on our stronghold. We got to take the time to pay attention and say, is this true or is this false? Is the fear of it greater than the faith of it? And it's hard to overcome something that has a cognitive and emotional state to it. And I want to end with telling you about a man. There was a man who knew how to restart after failure. He didn't let false tagging kind of dictate his life. When he was 7 years old, his family was forced out of his home on a legal technicality, and he had to work to help support them. At age 9, his mother died. And at 22, he lost his job as a store clerk. He wanted to go to law school, but his education was lacking. At 23, he went into debt to become a partner in a small store. At 26, his business partner died, leaving him a huge debt and took him many years to repay it. At 28, he asked his girlfriend of 4 years to marry him. She said no. At 37, on his third try, he was elected to Congress, but 2 years later, he failed to be reelected. At 41, his 4-year-old son died. At 45, he ran for the Senate and lost. At 47, he failed as the vice presidential candidate. At 49, he ran for the Senate again and lost. At 51, he was elected the President of the United States. His name was, you probably said it, Abraham Lincoln. A man whom many considered our greatest leader, went through failure after failure, and he could have just believed that false tag in his brain that says, stop trying this. All you do is fail each time you try to go out there on a limb, and you're just making yourself look like a fool. Don't be that vulnerable to life. Just survive life. Don't invent life. And the one thing that remained constant throughout Lincoln's life was the way that he restarted after failure. So today, do you want to survive life or invent life? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this moment that we can just think about life. Think about what it is we want life to be, because we only get one life. So please, Father, show us what it is you would have for us to do. Give us that purpose. Help us to see the fixed mindset that we're stuck in and be able to break it the way the Fosbury flop broke open a new way to do the high jump. Break us open and give us a new way to do life, Father. Invent a new life. So, Father, we just thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. God bless you. Hope you have a great week. See you next week. Elijah, the book is coming.